Hello, and thanks for taking the time to listen to Reimagining Cyber. New episodes of the podcast drop every Wednesday. So to make sure you never miss a show, do hit the follow or subscribe button wherever you listen. You can also find us on the @Reimagining Cyber YouTube channel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Reimagining Cyber. My name is Tyler Moffitt, Senior Security Analyst, and today we're going to be talking about everything AI in regards to regulation. There's been so much development and sort of acceleration growth, and not only the capabilities of AI, but the adoption and real-world application and use. And so we're going to talk everything you need to know about, what are the implications security-wise, regulatory-wise, all this compliance the mountain of it that's coming. We're going to talk all about it with one of my coworkers, Matt Aldridge, who's worked with me at OpenText for well over 15 years. And he's definitely somebody who's been following and tracking this closely. And so I consider him to be one of the foremost experts, and I'm glad to have him on the show today. So Matt, welcome to the podcast, and glad to have you here.
Hi, Tyler. It's great to be with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Not a problem. So obviously talking about AI, how it's moved from experimentation to execution. Specifically this last calendar year, we really saw, an increase in capability, agentic AI now being granted permissions by all sense of the word to make decisions, take actions. In many cases, we saw some examples where, when we've talked about previously, how they can make mistakes, cause real world impact. And so regulators, of course, at the heels, stepping in fast. So I want to talk to you and sort of unpack what AI regulation, what does it mean for security teams, businesses of all different sizes, and, MSPs and stuff heading into 2026.
Yeah, there's a lot to go at, and it's a very fast moving area. But of course, with regulation, it's never as fast moving as the actual AI itself that it's trying to regulate. So there's definitely a lot of different moving parts that we have to try and keep track of.
What about this year specifically, this past year from 2025 to 2026, in your eyes, what do you feel has changed or feels different, if you will? And obviously I feel like there's an accelerating of it, but as far as from regulation, do we feel like it's enough to keep up with how AI is taking off?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's never going to be fast enough or agile enough to control all the things we'd like, or to give us the frameworks that we need. However, we have great starting points happening around the world, kind of led by the EU AI Act and other areas that are catching up or keeping up with legislation. And of course, there's always challenges as well with the EU being the first to legislate. Then they have a lot of learnings coming out of that, because if they're not careful, they over-legislate, they start to cause problems that can actually cripple businesses in their region, could actually slow down development, cause all sorts of knock-on issues that maybe weren't anticipated when those things were first pulled together. So it's a very much an evolving, moving situation, and that there are new upcoming changes that we'll see in Europe that are being planned already, that are bringing together changes on AI and also on GDPR and other areas that will try to simplify things, rationalize, and actually maybe even do some deregulation, as much as regulation. So sometimes we see that the regulation goes a little bit overstepping, going a bit too far. Then we actually have to pull things back, simplify, and reframe what we're trying to achieve from the regulations that are being put in place.
Yeah, that's interesting. You talk about deregulation. You sort of, I would say, accompany the term regulation with like slowing the innovation, if that makes sense. But I understand, they want to add accountability. But obviously AI is big on the impact, so I can understand why they want to follow the hype there. So I guess talking about, you mentioned, GDPR, and I know California usually leads the way with America with, CCPA or CPPA, and now CPRA, those new ones that they sort of added. Do you have anything that, what's actually changed with California? Is there anything security teams should be aware of with what's upcoming and what they're trying to create?
Yeah, so CPRA kind of strengthens CCPA doesn't really replace it. They're building on the foundations there. And again, like I said before, there's always a bit of a scramble to try and get these things in place. There's the recognition stage where people go, hang on, this is coming down the line. We've got to deal with this. We see what's happening elsewhere in the world. We recognize we need to protect the privacy of our citizens. Let's do this. Let's get this in place. Let's show some leadership here. But of course, the risks are that sometimes things are going to get missed, things are going to get slightly overstated or misrepresented or what have you. So it's an ongoing, evolving beast, and so CPRA is bringing more of that into play. They're doing more things, looking at things like cybersecurity audits and risk assessments, and one of the big areas is actually the looking at the automated decision-making technology. So a lot of that does bring AI into play, and there's a lot of risk associated with making invalid assumptions about what systems are capable of doing. And so that's some of the things it's trying to address.
Yeah, the automated decision-making technology, the ADMT, I have a feeling we're gonna hear that acronym a little bit more as time goes on, for sure.
Yeah. Whether it's fortunately or unfortunately, of course, AI enables a great kind of force multiplier when it comes to the employees and the capabilities of any organization, and indeed of individuals, empowering individuals to achieve a lot more with their time than maybe they could have done without AI. But when it comes to these automated solutions, this is one example. So automated decision making is one key example of automation, but there are many others. And what they're looking at here is things like, if you are automatically trying to identify, say, someone from their image, from the facial recognition, where maybe it's like a security system, maybe it's policing, maybe they're trying to pick out people from a crowd who may be like known felons or what have you, they are going to rely on technology to do that. And of course, the end users of the technology don't appreciate the potential risks in terms of using that, based on how that system's been built, how it's been trained, and what the data was that was used when training the systems. So a lot of these systems have inherent biases built into them that maybe even the creators of those systems didn't have full awareness of at the time. And so what the legislation's trying to do in many different parts of the world now is ensure that there's a lot of screening done of training data before it gets anywhere near AI models or machine learning models or whatever it may be. You need to understand what is the quality of that data and how is it representing any kind of population of users or people or backgrounds or whatever it is you're using it to check. So it may be even the financial systems, is it trained across the board to look at all types of transactions, or is it skewed in some way? So it's going to be happy about, particular types of transactions, whereas it might be like flagging up other ones, but that could be based on very biased information, depending on where that data set came from. So yeah, things like facial recognition is where we hear about it in the news, and why we've seen things like CCTV that has facial recognition built into it being very highly regulated, and in certain instances actually banned, because they just isn't that level of trust in those systems in many cases. Then we see the opposite end of the spectrum as well. You go to places like China, and everywhere has very highly developed facial recognition systems that are tracking people down to the sort of human individual level, and that's the kind of next level of where it can end up. And so a lot of places are trying to legislate to ensure that maybe they don't want to get to quite to that level.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. You mentioned earlier how like the average user doesn't really appreciate all that goes into it, and I completely agree. When you have these AI systems that now, like all by themselves, automated, can essentially plan, decide, and act all together, when you combine that, it's very, very powerful. Lots of implications, and I'm sure in many cases, depending on interpretation of which different country, it's going to collide with regulation. Talk us about how you think that might happen.
Yeah, well, like it's already happening. So we're already seeing some, like I said earlier, there's a risk of holding back innovation and limiting company agility when it comes to implementing some of these systems. But fundamentally, safety probably needs to have a higher priority. So that's, we are seeing that, and it's great to see a lot of these legislators putting the right emphasis on safety and on fairness, and then also, of course, on the privacy side of things and data protection, because it's very easy to feed vast amounts of data into different AI systems, and you don't always fully understand how that data might get extracted or misused or abused. So lots of care does need to be given to the data side, whether it's training data or actually operational data that's being processed through these AI systems. And then when we look at the EU, for example, they're now bringing or discussing what's called the digital omnibus. So that's like an initiative they have to start amending existing regulations. So this is where I was talking about maybe some elements of deregulation, some elements of changing the timelines for implementation of certain regulations as well, to allow a bit more time, to allow a bit more responsiveness, and just really trying to still bring in these protections whilst not holding back development to such an extent as was being risked before. So I think the rest of the world can learn from this, that there are risks to having that leadership on this side of things, because things are moving so fast, and you do need to make sure that you can be reactive as things develop. And these regulations always need to have an element of fluidity to them.
For sure. And I'm sure there's differencing approaches, and how you said, like, they try to balance having the progress that this brings without hindering it and having everybody take full advantage of it, while still, concerning the implications for security and trying to have some sort of fairness and privacy. And we talked a little bit about California, but California is only, the part of America. What are we seeing in Europe? What do you have information on that?
Yeah, I mean, in Europe, like I say, over here, we have been kind of ahead of the curve with privacy, with GDPR, with the AI, with the EU AI Act, and in other areas as well. But the risk of being leaders in that space is that you do risk holding back the development of certain solutions within that area. So yeah, we're sort of shifting from a position where everything has been heavily regulated, where sometimes that's actually bringing us to the point of risking competitiveness. And now we're starting to move towards elements of deregulation, and certainly a lot more pragmatism when it comes to these things.
Well, that's good to hear. Specifically, talking to some of our core audience here, what does this mean for, small to medium-sized businesses or managed service providers? A lot of them hear regulation and they might assume, oh, it's only for large-scale enterprises and it doesn't really, apply to them. What's the approach, or how should they look at this?
Yeah, and so just because you're a small organization doesn't mean that you're not in scope. Very much these things are coming at it from a perspective of individual protection, privacy protection. So as long as you have that mindset, which you should have anyway, and you take that mindset with you when you're dealing with AI and implementing AI solutions and processing data using AI, outsourcing to anything that's going to have AI involved in it, then you'll be doing the right thing, without getting too much into the weeds of where you might be located and what the legislation is. It's going to apply directly to you. Obviously, you need to check that out with your own legal resources. But in generally speaking, as long as you are demonstrating that you are taking very good care, the best care you can when it comes to the data of your customers, of your employees, your contractors, if you're processing any other public data, personal data, as long as you're going through the rigors that should and are expected of any organization to protect that information and to manage it, control it, and have that full life cycle approach to it, And then whenever you're dealing with AI, you need to take the same approach. So in the same way as if you are going to outsource some element of data processing, you're going to have to make sure you've got agreements in place that control exactly what can be done with that data, how it's protected, etc. Then you have to have that same approach with an AI solution as well. So if it's an AI solution you're running in-house and you can completely control it, and you can evidence that the data that's stored in there is highly protected, then that's great. But as soon as you start going to use any off-the-shelf solution, any cloud solution, any third-party solution that is not entirely under your control, that's where you need to make sure that everything is very carefully defined in terms of how that data is protected, in terms of what you're doing to protect things in advance, and then in terms of how you're doing that ongoing due diligence to make sure that things are working the way they should be and that data is not being put at risk. So there's a lot of solutions out there that can help you with de-risking the use of external third-party data processing. You can do anonymization, pseudonymization, those types of things where you can actually take a lot of the risk out of using third-party solutions. And again, whether you do that and to what extent you do that needs to come out of the risk assessment that you're making. So yeah, I think as long as you're showing that you've gone through that process, you're assessing the risk, you're managing, mitigating that risk, and not just going blindly ahead with using the latest, greatest technology, then you're definitely going to be along the right lines.
Well, yeah, I mean, I tell you what, that sounds like a lot, and it might be, if anything, a little bit confusing of everything that needs to be taken care of for these, smaller teams. So for, MSPs, I'm guessing there's some opportunity here on sort of centralizing them and telling them, hey, look, here's what you should get, here's how you should follow this. It does seem like there is a definite opportunity for MSPs here to sort of help those SMBs navigate the new AI landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they need to be doing things like doing inventories for the AI solutions they're using, making sure they understand what is out there already. They're like we said earlier, these things are moving so quickly, and employees are in a challenging situation because they are increasingly under more pressure to deliver more wide-ranging impacts on their organizations because the organizations believe them to be using AI and expect them to be using AI in different ways. So as an organization and leadership within that organization, you need to have a handle on to what extent is this happening? How do we control this? Do we need to have some kind of approval cycle for new AI solutions before anyone's allowed to use them? We have to be very careful about where any of our data gets put outside of our organization. And then once you've done that and you start to understand and control the actual AI solutions that are being used, you've got to start thinking about then, okay, so are we making any decisions based on this AI deployment? And what are the risks around that? What are the risks around those decisions that are being made? How do we mitigate and manage the risks from any automated decision-making processes that are going to be happening across our organization? And this is going to become just, on a daily basis, we're going to have more and more issues and risks around this. So I think, we can touch a little bit on the whole agentic AI thing. And we're seeing, every day new solutions coming out that are linking together multiple different AI models in the cloud, maybe local ones. Yep. That are allowing automation, that are allowing scheduling, even things like social networking almost between AI bots, so that they can kind of compare how they've got on different challenges and discuss with each other how they might do things better next time. But the more communication that is allowed into any LLM or large model, the more that happens, the more that communication opens up, then you dramatically amplify the risk of something going wrong, whether it's just something as simple as unintentional data loss or something much more significant like prompt injection happening across social media platforms or between bots, bots that are actually designed to harvest and take control of other bots to build AI bot armies effectively. These are the sorts of things we're going to start to see. And so, yes, of course, a lot of the onus needs to go on the creators of these solutions and these platforms. However, the users also need to take an element of responsibility here. If you go and put these systems in place and leave them wide open, like we're seeing vast numbers of these local AI bots being opened up to the internet and left open. And then, of course, any vulnerability comes along, all the data that's being managed by those systems becomes vulnerable. All the controls that those things have, decision making, like we were saying earlier, all those things get opened up to be influenced. And so it's the Wild West. And I would just say to any business,
That's a good point.
Whether you're an MSP or whether you're just a small business yourself, make sure you're carefully recording the decision-making processes around how you roll these things out and the due diligence you've done.
Yeah. I've been seeing a lot with Claudebot, which is a new agentic AI that people are essentially how do you say, the next stage of sort of chat, this local AI agent that you're having on your machine that then you can contact with your phone and just text it, and then you give it access to the internet like you were talking about, and it can go and do all these things for you. And if there was a compromise on your computer through malware and it decided to take over and give it, like you said, all the data that it has, all the context and everything you've been using and searching, absolutely has massive potential for misuse. We're talking not just in the hacking and malware world, but who knows what type of new attack or new thing that we needed to protect ourselves from. Like you said, an army of AI bots seems very real.
Yeah.
And I feel like we're seeing the beginning stages of that. That makes sense. Not to yell, Terminator or Skynet or anything, but it does feel like we're playing around with how that started, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, it's now, so that Claudebot thing has gone through a couple of renamings over the last few days. It's now called OpenClaw. And because they had objections from Anthropic about the naming of it. And then that in itself created all sorts of carnage because people were, these guys created some new crypto coin and then started trying to ride on the back of the popularity of the Claudebot, and all sorts of crazy things like that have happened. And this is just the beginning. And I mean, the great thing about this type of solution, and this is just one example of it, is that it does empower people to do quite incredible things, quite incredible levels of automation. But without those people implementing it, you don't necessarily have to really understand quite what's happening behind the scenes. And you're very quickly going to lose track of where your data is, where your credentials are, because some of these systems will take details of how to log into your email, for example, how to log into your social media, your WhatsApp messaging. And as soon as that has come out, as soon as something like your email account has come out of your control, you are hugely, hugely exposed from a security perspective. So just I would say, yes, this is great. It's exciting. Just slow down and take very great care about how you proceed from this point. A lot of people, this capability is not something that is super difficult to do. It's kind of the linking between multiple existing AI services. And part of the reason why it hasn't really become popular yet is because of the dangers of it. Nobody has really dared to do it. And when we have seen things like some of the big AI providers like Google, for example, enabling agentic control of local systems, immediately you see that some guy has asked a system to delete a file, and then the system has wiped his entire drive, and things like that. So as soon as you start having these agents that have the same level of access as you do, you're going to see all kinds of abuse and all kinds of just unfortunate errors or hallucination based mistakes happening because this technology is still very young. So I would say any implementations you do, just take whatever steps you can to ring fence them, to isolate them, segment them, whatever it is you can do to keep them at arm's length from anything of any significant importance to you or to your organization, because it's going to come back to bite you very quickly otherwise.
That's a good point and segue here as you talk about recommendations. Just to ask you to sort of wrap this up, we appreciate your time, is, if you had to give listeners sort of a short list of things to watch out for, like what should they actually do this year? Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, I think, we've touched on most of the points already. Understand and audit what you're doing with your data on the whole. Think for data protection, start from a data protection standpoint and a risk assessment standpoint. Ensure then you are understanding what AI usage you have, how that's being done. We have, every individual in the organization has potential access to very, very powerful and diverse AI tools now. How are you going to manage the risk of that happening, and how are you going to encourage your employees, your contractors down a particular route that's going to de-risk as much as possible the use of those systems? How are you going to write up those audits? How often are you going to come back and continue these risk assessments on the basis that things are changing so fast? And, it's not really, there's no point trying to have a list of things that people can't do. You've really got to come at it from a very clear policy that states what people are able to do, and everything outside of that is excluded, and then make sure everyone is trained up and understands what the company position is, what the organizational position is on that. Obviously, that will have to evolve and be pretty nimble, because you don't want to hold your company back, but at the same time that there are levels of risk that you really must not take. And what we were just talking about is a great example of that.
No, I completely agree. The risks are pretty massive here when you sort of understand the full levels of permissions that we are just sort of handing over to the AI robots. And this isn't about stopping AI. Obviously, it's very powerful. Everybody is leveraging it. Only more and more people are using it to a greater degree as time goes on. Where are we at a year from now, 2-3 years from now? Who knows? But I mean, the regulation, it isn't about stopping AI. It's just about, making sure we use it responsibly, defensibly, sustainably, you name it. So I really appreciate the time that you gave us here, Matt. So AI regulation isn't a future problem, anymore. It's definitely a reality. Security teams, understand that it's going to be a much, much better position if you start thinking about these things now than reacting to them later. So Matt, once again, thanks for breaking this down. And to our listeners, we'll link additional resources for you. Matt and I actually presented a New Year's resolutions webinar where we talk about a lot of these governances and AI stuff. So if you want to know more about that, we can link that in the chat. But thanks again, Matt, for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Tyler. Really great to be with you. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Reimagining Cyber. Please remember to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcast.